But again, there's no imminent threat to the United States. And we, as I said at the top of the show, don't have clear-cut goals of our own. This is why President Trump is all over the map when he explains why we're doing this. It's the Israelis who are in the driver's seat. And the Israelis have made it unequivocally clear that their goal is regime change. And let me just say a bit more about this. People talk about eliminating the missiles, the ballistic missiles that the Iranians have. They talk about eliminating once and for all Iran's nuclear enrichment capability, and finally Iran's ability to support Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. But you can't do any of these things unless you have regime change. There has to be a story here that you change the regime, and that new regime then decides it's not going to build ballistic missiles, it's not going to support the Houthis and Hamas, etc., and it's not going to pursue nuclear enrichment. You have to get rid of the regime. The Israelis understand this, and you have to believe that, number one, you can get rid of the regime, and number two, that you can put a new regime in place that will decide to never go down the nuclear enrichment road, to never build ballistic missiles, and to never support the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah. That's what you have to believe. So regime change has to be the goal here, because it's the only way of solving those other problems. If you go in and destroy the missiles, or you go in and eliminate the nuclear enrichment capability, they'll just rebuild those assets. So you have to get regime change, and you have to believe that the new regime will not be interested in all of those military options. That's the issue here. And I ask anybody who thinks this military operation is going to work, do you think you're going to get regime change? Is that going to be the end result? And if you do think we're going to get regime change, do you think that that new regime is going to not want missiles, nuclear enrichment, and not want to support the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah? I find it impossible to come up with a plausible story that tells me how you get regime change and you get a new regime that has no interest in doing those three things.
You just heard Professor John Mearsheimer, University of Chicago political scientist and one of America's sharpest critics of liberal interventionism, expose a fatal flaw in Western thinking. The Israelis are in the driver's seat, and their goal is regime change. And here's the trap. The U.S. claims it wants to eliminate Iran's missiles, nuclear program, and proxy support, but admits this is impossible without regime change. Yet Washington still denies regime change is the goal. Why? Because admitting it would expose the entire war as a lie. Let's unpack Mearsheimer's logic, because this isn't just about Iran. It's about why every U.S. war since 1991 has failed. Mearsheimer starts by dissecting the Western demands. Destroy Iran's ballistic missiles, eliminate nuclear enrichment capability, stop support for Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis, and then drops the truth bomb. You can't do any of these things unless you have regime change. Why? Because Iran isn't North Korea. If you bomb missiles today, they'll rebuild them tomorrow. If you destroy centrifuges, they'll build new ones underground. If you cut off proxy funding, they'll find new routes through Russia or China. As Mearsheimer states plainly, if you go in and destroy those assets, they'll just rebuild them. This isn't speculation. It's history. Remember Libya? NATO bombed Gaddafi's air force, destroyed his weapon stockpiles, promised peace through democracy. Result? Civil war, slave markets, Russian mercenaries, and missiles now pointed at Europe. Same with Iraq. Same with Syria. You can't solve a nation's security strategy with airstrikes. You need regime change. Now here's where Western logic collapses. To achieve their goals, the U.S. and Israel must believe two impossible things. Belief number one: regime change is achievable. You have to believe you can get rid of the regime. But Iran isn't Iraq in 3.85 million people versus Iraq's 25 million. Mountainous terrain ideal for guerrilla warfare, 40 years of anti-U.S. mobilization, Russian/Iranian drone factories inside its borders, as Mearsheimer asks. Do you think you're going to get regime change? History says no. U.S. failed in Vietnam, 20 years. Failed in Afghanistan, 20 years. Failed in Iraq. Regime change succeeded but created chaos. Iran would be 10x harder, but belief number 2. The new regime would surrender sovereignty. You have to believe the new regime won't want missiles, nukes, or proxies. This is pure fantasy. Imagine if Russia installed a pro-Moscow government in Mexico, demanded Mexico dismantle its army, ban missile development, cut ties with Cuba. Would Mexico comply? Never. Iran faces the same reality. Surrounded by U.S. bases, Iraq, Gulf states, threatened by Israeli strikes, sanctioned by Western financial system, its missiles, nukes, and proxies aren't aggression. They're survival tools. Mearsheimer nails it. Is that new regime going to not want missiles? Not want nuclear enrichment? Not want to support the Houthis? The answer is obvious. Any Iranian leader who surrendered these would be overthrown within months. Mearsheimer reveals the critical truth most ignore. Israel has unequivocally stated regime change is its goal. Because Tel Aviv understands what Washington denies. Iran's existence threatens Israel's regional dominance. No deal will ever satisfy Israeli security demands. Only a pro-Western Tehran would stop supporting Hezbollah. But here's the irony. Regime change would make Iran more hostile to Israel. Why? A U.S.-installed puppet regime would be seen as illegitimate. Iranians would unite against foreign occupation. Like Iraq 2003 to 2011, anti-Israel sentiment would explode from 90% to 99%, as Mearsheimer implies. Israel isn't seeking peace. It's seeking submission, and that's why peace is impossible. Now consider Trump's position. Mearsheimer says President Trump is all over the map when he explains why we're doing this. Because there is no coherent goal. If it's about nuclear weapons, Iran has none and denies wanting them. If it's about missiles, they're defensive against U.S. and Israeli strikes. If it's about Hamas, Iran's support is minimal compared to Saudi/Qatari funding. The only consistent thread? Israel's demand for regime change. But admitting that would violate international law, Article 2 of UN Charter, expose U.S. as an aggressor, destroy NATO unity. So Washington lies. It claims, we're defending Israel. But Israel attacked first, bombing Iranian sites days before scheduled U.S.-Iran talks. It claims Iran threatens global security. But Iran hasn't invaded a country since 1795. That this isn't policy. It's delusion. Mearsheimer ends with a challenge. I find it impossible to come up with a plausible story that tells me how you get regime change in a new regime that has no interest in missiles, nukes, or proxies. He's right, because history shows regime change creates power vacuums. Libya, migrant crisis, slave markets. New regimes become more radical. Iraq, ISIS. Proxy wars escalate. Syria, Russian intervention. For Iran, this means if the U.S. attacks, Russia and China will arm Tehran with hypersonic missiles. If regime change fails, Iran accelerates its nuclear program. If it succeeds, the U.S. gets another Afghanistan. But with oil fields and nukes, and the ultimate irony, the war will make Iran more likely to pursue nuclear weapons. Because as Mearsheimer's Realism teaches, nations surrounded by enemies seek ultimate deterrence. In conclusion, John Mearsheimer gives us a rare and unfiltered look at the real forces shaping the Iran crisis. Not nukes, not terrorism, not security, but a strategic delusion where the West demands the impossible while refusing to admit its true goal. The U.S. can't eliminate Iran's capabilities without regime change. Regime change won't create a compliant Iran, and regime change itself is nearly impossible. So why wage this war? Because, as Mearsheimer implies, Israel needs a permanent enemy to justify its occupation. The U.S. military-industrial complex needs endless war to justify its budget, and Western elites need a threat to distract from domestic collapse. But history won't be fooled. Realism won't bend, and Iran won't surrender. Stay tuned for more analysis right here on The Informed Perspective. Until next time, stay informed and think critically.
Those two states don't seem to come up for discussion very much. And Pakistan in particular has been the sort of incubator of radical Islam and Islamist terrorism for a long time. So this is really about Israel's interest in destroying Iran and removing it as an obstacle to Israeli military hegemony or Jewish supremacy, however you want to put it. And we're into it. We're committed to it. And I think ultimately logistics will probably have a big impact because we will eventually run out of missiles. And I think we're on the road already because I just don't think President Trump or his advisors really believed that they would end up in a long war with Iran. And that's where they are right now.